When King decided to begin his serious intellectual quest for a method to eliminate social evil, he was setting an incredibly lofty goal. He recognized that such an objective would meet with fierce resistance. He said, "I came to see that no one gives up his privileges without strong resistance."
King knew there would be staunch resistance from the proponents of the status quo. Struggle would be inevitable. He even anticipated that this struggle might be violent.
But he made his undertaking even more difficult by reaching for something more than just a victory over oppressive elements. King believed that a victory would be hollow without reconciliation and the creation of a beloved community after the struggle concluded.
Unlike Malcolm X, a contemporary of King and a dissenting voice against many of his ideas, King was unwilling to accept independent yet empowered black communities. While Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam movement supported a violent revolution that would result in a form of racial separation, King was not content to simply do away with a toxic relationship between blacks and whites. He desired to establish a new, loving relationship between his black brothers and his white neighbors.
The crucial insight that led to King's success was that violence was wholly incompatible with his vision of social justice, and that nonviolent, creative protest could make significant strides towards social justice. King realized that only with nonviolent action and creative suffering, both of which he would justify and motivate through love, could he accomplish his twin objective of overcoming the oppressive elements opposing equality and of providing for reconciliation and a beloved community. He told us, "I can only close the gap in the community by meeting hate with love." King recognized early on that the black community could not gain their civil rights through a show of force. Their white oppressors held too much power to be defeated in a conventional revolution, and held that power too jealously to willingly surrender it. A new methodology was necessary, and King chose what he called nonviolent direct action. Nonviolent direct action, King says, seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue.
The gradualist movement, led by many liberal Southern whites, opposed King on these grounds. They believed that although King's methods were nonviolent, the crisis and tension they created would lead to further violence in the community. Such actions as incite to hatred and violence, however technically peaceful those actions may be, have not contributed to the resolution of our local problems, they said. We do not believe that these days of new hope are days when extreme measures are justified in Birmingham. Due to this, they pled to King, isn't negotiation a better path?
King's answer to this was that his movement had already tried negotiation, and it had failed. The tension that the clergy accused King of creating, he claimed, was already present as the basic tension between good and evil in the segregated South. To make this tension evident, King began seeking out public confrontation with the systematic forces of white supremacy. Had King's public confrontations been acts of violence aimed at compelling cooperation from the establishment, the forces of oppression would have only gained justification for their treatment of African Americans. But King instead created situations where African Americans flaunted the authority of unjust laws and left white authorities with the choice between enforcing their unjust laws with violence or not enforcing them at all. When white authorities did respond with violence, with arrests in Montgomery and tear gas on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, King got the creative tension he wanted. Spectators were challenged to justify the action of their state governments. How could it be right for police officers to brutally beat these demonstrators, particularly when they never raised a hand to strike back? This planned and purposeful suffering provoked careful thought and self-examination, and ultimately prompted the negotiation that King wanted. Suffering is infinitely more powerful than the law of the jungle for converting the opponent and opening his ears to the voice of reason, King explained. The nonviolent nature of King's protests left the perpetuators of discrimination nothing with which to justify their use of violence. When it was at its most successful, King's methodology awakened a sense of moral shame in his oppressors. Now, this wasn't always successful. Some racist Southerners were content to continue beating blacks into submission. However, Such violence became unsustainable as public opinion was won over by demonstrators' willingness to suffer. This too was a crucial part of King's designs. Public support is magnetically attracted to the advocates of nonviolence, he said, while those who employ violence are literally disarmed by overwhelming sentiment against their stand. It was of utmost importance for King to win this battle for public opinion. He realized that Americans couldn't be coerced into equality, couldn't be strong-armed into accepting their new black brothers. In fact, he didn't even see his struggle as a struggle against white men or racist. He said, "Nonviolent resistance does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding."
Malcolm X objected to King's insistence on nonviolence, believing it to be unintelligent and impractical. Contrary to King's emphasis on friendship, Malcolm denounced the white race and supported a black nationalist revolution during his time with Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam. During his Message to the Grassroots in Detroit in 1963, he firmly stated, "We have a common enemy, the white man." He argued that an interracial brotherhood was impossible and that violent revolution against white power would be the only solution to racial inequality.
King's struggle, however, was against the very existence of evil in the world, and his ultimate goal was that of peace and reconciliation. The end, he said, is redemption and reconciliation. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. King's goal was not only to build a nation free from racism and discrimination, but to avoid sowing the seeds of hatred in the process.
To the contrary, Malcolm X argued for equality by means of a black nationalist revolution in which land was taken from the whites to start a separate nation. "Revolution is based on land," he said. "Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality." Malcolm believed such a revolt must rely on violence, based on the historical precedent of all successful revolutions. "You don't have a peaceful revolution," he claimed. "You don't have a turn-the-other-cheek revolution. There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution."
King, however, recognized that a revolution fueled by hate would only beget more hate and bitterness. In his words, "To return evil for evil only intensifies the existence of hate and evil in the universe." He realized that only love, manifested through persistently nonviolent, direct action, could create a society free of hate and discrimination. He grounds these claims in Scripture. When Jesus says, "Love the enemy," King tells us, he's saying, love the enemy because there is something about love that can transform, that can change, that can arouse the conscience of the enemy. And only by doing this are you able to transform the jangling discords of society into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood and understanding. King realized that his vision of social justice was not simply a matter of the end of attaining the beloved community. He realized that a beloved community must be built every step of the way, with love. He realized that the ends are inherent in the means. This, to some extent, is what we have forgotten today. We have forgotten that the means of any protest are inextricable from the ends. Any social justice movement tainted by violence is all too easily discounted and will never result in the understanding and beloved community that must be the end goal of any true social justice movement. The dominant issue in today's conversation on social justice may be police brutality. The shooting of Michael Brown in 2014 revived a dialogue on police brutality towards African Americans, but was grossly mishandled by the community of Ferguson. Rather than presenting a united, nonviolent demonstration to prove how inappropriate police brutality is and voice their frustrations, citizens turned to looting and rioting, inviting the very police reprisals that they were protesting against, and allowing spectators to justify their suffering, rather than using creative, unearned suffering to gain sympathy and understanding. These incidents drew the nation's eye toward Ferguson, but left many skeptical of the Black Lives Matter movement that arose from the incident. As police officers and store owners clashed with rioters, they moved further away from Dr. King's ideal of a beloved community, rather than closer the goals of acceptance and reconciliation.
If victims of injustice today practice nonviolence with as much dedication as King, I believe issues of race couldn't be so easily dismissed, but would rather become thick with the creative tension that King advocated. Whites today are furnished with a convenient, although faulty, reason to arm police with military-grade weaponry when newsreels of Ferguson seemingly depict black communities in open revolt against law and order. It becomes all too easy to dismiss claims of police brutality when officers become the victims of retaliatory violence. The only way our society could be moved to act swiftly and decisively against police excesses would be if we were collectively made to feel shame for the actions of those officers. Shame that would be felt far and wide only if their actions were starkly contrasted by consistently nonviolent behavior on the part of victimized African American communities. The creation of King's beloved community is dependent on the use of nonviolent direct action. The slightest hint of violence discredits even the most sincere social justice movement. Unjust systems can only be altered when we meet hate with love.